Lecture 28.
Now, this is unusual, this handout. And you'll notice that beginning on page 282, it promises to give you something that skips clear over to 313. And that is the new Constitution, the full text of the new Constitution, which has been written by Dr. Guy Tugwell at the Center for Democratic Studies in Santa Barbara, and is the way that the country is now being run, even though it has not been adopted. And the people in Washington, the Supreme Court, who all belong to this same general group of thinkers and who frequently meet together at the center, are pushing the United States in the direction of the new Constitution without even adopting it. And nobody is resisting it. So they probably will never present it for adoption. But I wanted you to have the text because that's the direction we're going. And it's a system of government almost identical with the one that Mussolini set up for Italy. Almost identical in every respect, almost as though it had copied it. It's a fascist society. We're moving toward it very fast, and you ought to be aware of the trends. Some of the things they're doing by fiat from the Supreme Court. For example, the Constitution says that the local states will decide who can vote and who can't. And they will set up the requirements for voting, etc., etc., etc. The Supreme Court came along and all of a sudden started ruling a lot of those provisions out as though they had jurisdiction, which they did not. And they said that any residence requirements over 30 days is unconstitutional. Absolutely no legal basis for that decision whatever. And as a result, as the new Constitution permits, it says nothing over 30 days, you see. All of a sudden the Supreme Court pulls this right out of the air. Anything over 30 days will be considered unconstitutional. That's in the new Constitution. According to our present Constitution, that's unconstitutional. So things are happening now real fast. And it was predicted in the Book of Mormon over and over. And I just wanted you to have it in cold print so you would see the direction that we're going. And these men mean to do well with this. They're not evil in their hearts in the sense that they think that, or that they hate the Constitution per se. They just think this is a better way. Lucifer was very sincere when he said, I got a better way. Okay.
How did you find out about this? Where did you get the copy of it?
I wrote to the Center for Democratic Studies, as I say on page 282. This draft first appeared in the Center magazine September and October 1970. The following reprint is a photographic reproduction from the Center magazine, which is being published by permission. I just wrote to the editor and I said, can I reproduce this? Oh, he said, good. Distribute it as widely as you can. And I said, I will. So we are. So I wanted you to have the whole text. And I'll analyze it for you after you get it so that you can see what it provides. And you'll be amazed. You want to live in a police state, that's what it provides for. All in the interest of efficiency, prosperity, and peace. You'll notice that we've reached a point in our lesson material now where there's almost a complete sweep of the previous generation. The great 7 Years' War ended in 61 BC. In 57 BC, we had Helaman dying. Helaman, the great hero of the 7 Years' War, president of the church, and he was replaced by his very young son. We think about 21 years old, Helaman II. Now, Helaman I was so young his father was afraid to give him the administration of the church, but Helaman II seems to be even younger. The general is no longer Moroni, but whom? Moronihah. And Moronihah had a terrific experience in 53 BC, which was right at the close of Alma 63, and you may have missed it. 2 verses of a great war where the Lamanites came back again under the direction of the Zoramite kings and leaders, and Moronihah had to go back and drive them out of the land and into the wilderness and back to their own country. Then in 52 BC, we have the chief judge dying. Who's that? Pahoran died. Now you've got a complete clean sweep. Moroni's gone, Helaman's gone, Pahoran's gone. And in their place you have Helaman II, Moronihah, and now we've got to find a new chief judge. Now the chief judge who died undoubtedly trained one of his sons to become the new judge. And in the past, the Nephites have always accepted the person that was pretty much nominated by the former judge, and usually it was one of his own sons. Nearly always it was one of his own sons. This time, although it would appear that he probably prepared Pahoran II for the stewardship, there are two other sons that think they can do it better. So they want to run, and the first one is Paenkai. Paenkai. And the next one is Pecumeni. All right? So they all three run. Who won the contest? Pahoran the second. And Pecumeni said, well, the people have spoken, so that's it. So we'll go back to plowing and harvesting the grain. But not Paenkai. Paenkai said, I would make a better ruler. I'm determined to win, and I'll take over by force of arms, which would have meant killing his older brother probably, and killing anybody else that got in his way. By force of arms, you're going to take over the country. What kind of a crime is this among the Nephites? What kind of a crime? What's the penalty? Yeah, it's capital crime, we call it. Capital crime. I mean, you can be decapitated or lose your head. Or, otherwise, it's as serious a crime as you can commit. So here's a very tough situation, a real tough one for the chief judge. His own brother is guilty of attempting to overthrow the government by violence. He is arrested, convicted. Now the sentence must be imposed. And the evidence in the record would suggest that this older brother did not want to pronounce sentence. So what does it say they did? He was sentenced by what? The voice of the people, which would mean that the chief judge must have said to the people, now he is my brother, and I want to do what you feel should be done. You all know what he's been guilty of, and I want you to indicate what you feel would be just. And what was the voice of the people? Die. Down. As used to say in Rome, die. And so he's getting ready to be executed, and all of a sudden the story shifts to one of his very devoted followers who says, if our Paenkai is going to die, so will the chief judge. And so he went right into the judgment room, right into the central administrative building in Zarahemla, and stabbed Pahoran II to death right while he was sitting in the judgment seat. And was so fast, boy, he was fast. He had his escape route all mapped out, and he took off, and they never did find him. However, the intelligence agents for the government did succeed in locating a few of them. And what happened to each one that they found? They were executed. But they could not find Kishkumen, and Kishkumen had all of his little band go into a secret oath that they wouldn't disclose who he was and actually who had done it. That had barely been taken care of. In other words, we got the murder, we got Kishkumen escaping, and before they can ferret them out, before anything effective has been done, we have 2 or 3 political problems that arise and military problems. Did they hold another election? And who was elected? The third son, Pecumeni, and they've just barely got him in office and everything settled down, and over from across the mountains comes whom? An apostate Nephite. What was his name? Well, he didn't come. He sent somebody else. He sent Coriantumr. Who's Coriantumr a descendant of? He's a descendant of Zarahemla, which means that he is a descendant of King David through Mulek. That's who Coriantumr is. Was he tall, strong, good-looking, articulate, a natural military leader? Unfortunately was. Now he's there on command of whom? The king of the Lamanites, whose name is Laman, huh? No, okay. Tubaloth. Now that's a Jaredite name. So is Coriantumr Jaredite. This is kind of interesting. And the secret order of the Gadiantans turns out later on to be Jaredite. So we got all kinds of things here mixed up. Anyway, Tubaloth is the son of whom? Amaron, who's the brother of Amalickiah. So you've got Zoramites running the whole show for the Lamanites. They're generals, they're kings, they're administrators. They're all apostate Nephites. Now, God is setting this thing up for a very interesting development just down the trail. Helaman the second son is going to convert that whole government administration to the gospel. And they're going to go down to the Lamanites, whom they govern, and convert all of them to the gospel. And you're going to end up in 50 years with the Lamanites belonging to the church and the Nephites in apostasy. This is an exciting story. And in this one book of 16 chapters, we're going to go through 52 years right down to the birth of Christ. So this is a great book. You're going to really enjoy it. Now, when Coriantumr came in, he did the stupidest thing a military leader could do. He thrust himself right into the midst of his enemy on the assumption that that's all there was. So his intelligence service was not good at all. Because either over at Moroni, on which coast? The east coast, southeast corner. Either at Moroni or the southwest corner, Moronihah had a whole army. And he was expecting the Lamanites to attack sometime. They came right across the mountains and went up the Sidon Valley. No military leader in his right mind would do anything as crazy as that. As a result, it caught Zarahemla completely unguarded, or unprotected, I should say. And they came so fast and so hard that Coriantumr was at the gates of Zarahemla before there was any warning. What did he overcome at the gates of Zarahemla? The guards, which would indicate that the attack came when? Probably at night, when it was under guard. And all the other gates would have been closed. So as the cry spreads through the city, war, war, attack, attack, Pecumeni is up in the middle of the night and trying to get out so they can reorganize the government or do something. He runs, there's no place to get, you can't get out. What happened to him? Who killed him? Coriantumr personally killed him. He chased him right to the wall and personally killed him. And then he killed everybody who gave him the slightest resistance. What I'd like to know, where was Helaman II? He was either on a mission somewhere, or else he very quietly sat this one out. He didn't raise his voice and he didn't resist, because he waits until another day when he has his moment of power. So Coriantumr just completely subdues this capital city, and he said, now this, we've knocked out the main center of the Nephite defenses. Obviously they'd have their main forces around Zarahemla. Since I've beaten them, I might just as well take the whole country. So I'll storm up all the way and take the land northward, and then we'll have them hemmed in forever. Now I want you to notice that as he left Zarahemla and went up toward Bountiful, it says he captured city after city, and he slew men, women, and children. And Mormon doesn't shock our minds with what also went on. In fact, Mormon was a very restrained writer. When we get up to his own life, he's going to reach a point where he will say, and so I gave up command over the Nephites, debauched, reprobate of a people. I said, I will not lead you anymore. And he says, I will not harass your souls with how evil they were, but sufficient to say, I would not lead them anymore. So we wondered why he got so excited. He wrote a letter to his son and told all about it. Now his son was on a mission up here in Utah or somewhere around here. At least we know he dedicated the St. George temple site, and he dedicated where we now have our Manti temple. He dedicated both of those temple sites while he was on a mission. So he was up in this territory somewhere. And his father wrote 2 letters to him. And when Moroni got around to finishing up the record, he said, you know, I want to include 2 of my father's letters to me while I was in the mission field. They're great letters. You ought to just hear what my father went through. And there are those 2 magnificent letters. You wouldn't believe what the Nephite troops did. They would capture the Lamanite women. They would first ravish them. Then they would kill them and eat their flesh. And Mormon said, it's so horrible what's happening. I've just given up the command of the Nephites, but I won't harass your soul by describing what went on. That's how terrible the Nephite degenerates had become. Of course, the Lamanites are doing the same thing. But that didn't excuse this. So he left all that out. Now he's doing the same thing here. It's sufficient for him to say they killed men, women, and children. He doesn't tell you about the criminal assaults and the cruelty and all the destruction that these kind of armies that are absolutely immoral or amoral inflict on a civilian population. It's truly horrible. I was reading an account of the attack of the Soviet army on Hungary in 1956, in November and early December of 56. And what that army did, it was just told to go in among the people and teach them never to rebel again. There'd been a revolution, you see, against Soviet rule. And what those troops were compelled to do to the women and the girls and the looting, terrible things that went on under the orders of their officers, to just terrify them, absolutely, make it just as horrible and ugly as they could. It's unbelievable. It's animals would never do anything so terrible. So Mormon leaves a lot of this out. The reason that I mention it is because of what Moroniha does when it's all over. Because this Coriantumr has inflicted atrocities on the Nephite community that are horrible to contemplate. But he's going to stop Coriantumr. He does it by sending a very fast message up to his father's old friend, the old battle-scarred champion who apparently has charge of Bountiful and Mulek and Gid and Omner and that territory up there. Who's he? Isn't that great, Lehi? See, just like that. That's wonderful. That's where I like to hear you respond. And he tells Lehi to cut him off. Was he able to stop Coriantumr? Dead in his tracks. In fact, Coriantumr started to go back, and what did he run into? Moroniha was there. And Moroniha cut him off. And the squeeze is called a pincer movement. And the pincher squeezed and squeezed front and back. This is a terrible way to have to fight. When you're fighting this enemy, the other enemy is coming up stabbing you in the back. I mean, it doesn't take very long to demoralize an army. But they fought with hate in their hearts, so most of them had to be killed. What happened to Coriantumr? He was killed. When it was all over, Moroniha gave them the chance to take the peace oath and return home. Can you see any military advantage in having these people go back to Tubelof with a report of what happened? Do you see any psychological advantage? What would you suggest it is? What would Tubelof's reaction be, do you think, when he got the report? That was a stupid thing that Coriantumr did. Boy, he put us right up there where we were immediately hemmed in on the assumption they didn't have any more troops, which was a stupid assumption. Next thing we know, we got two armies. We thought we'd wiped out most of the opposition. Surrounded by two armies. They annihilated us, Your Excellency. We few survive. We should never go up to the center of the land again. You can see that possibility. Something motivated Moroniha in turning these people loose and sending them back. So that's the way that one ended. Now, as soon as they've settled down, what's the first thing they have to do when the war is over and they're settled down? Cumeni's dead, so what do they got to do? They got to elect a new chief judge. And the people are unsettled. They've had a terrible time. Things are kind of upset. And when a people feel this way and insecure, they turn to a person in whom they have great confidence. And so who did it turn out to be? Helaman II. So like his grandfather, he is now president of the church, chief judge of the Nephites. At this stage, Mormon interrupts long enough to tell us the rise of a terrible force among the people. And I want you to catch the flavor of this Gadianton group, because Kishkumen, as soon as they've settled down and he gets his little band around him, he has turned over the leadership of his group to what man? Now, Gadianton is a popular politician. I never picked that up before. This is the third time I've rewritten the Book of Mormon verse by verse. And the more you write it, the more you think about it, you begin to get associations, so that single verses have great significance to you that didn't have it before. And here's what the verse says. Gadianton said to these who were his followers, if you will support me and we kill the present chief judge, and you support me in becoming the chief judge, then I'll make you the rulers throughout the land. I'll appoint you into all the positions of prominence and influence. What does this tell us about Gadianton? He is a well-known politician. and has a good chance of winning the election. He's going to work within the system. Now, that's not what Piankei was going to do. Piankei was going to seize the government by force of arms. But notice that Gadianton thinks he can win the election if we can just kill Helaman. So that means what about his prominence? He's very confident he can make it. Now, unfortunately, the history of the United States at the present time is filled with many of these same elements. And many of us who've had to study it and have come across it have a baffling experience of not being able to share it because it's not creditable. But when we're as far away from the history of government as it's now gradually grinding into a very hardcore system of control and manipulation, when we're as far away from that as you are from the Book of Mormon history, and the story has really been told how certain things happen, you find that it's the same pattern, including the assassinations. And it was very systematically done, very carefully manipulated and controlled. And people say, now wasn't that a tragic thing? Lee Harvey Oswald going down there and shooting the president? Indeed it was. Isn't it too bad that there are psychopathic people running around like that? They would kill a president? Fortunately, it was just one man, and that's the way the Warren Commission worked like 60 to build up the image that it was a one-man operation. They didn't want you to know the ramifications of that particular assassination. Let me just share with you a couple of things just to kind of spark your mind. See if you ever heard of it before. Lee Harvey Oswald was killed as soon as he was captured, which he wasn't supposed to be. In fact, let me just go back a little bit. As soon as he escaped from the building where he'd shot the president, he went to his apartment, changed his clothes. Then he's headed toward a special neighborhood. He has no reason for going there. Do you know what's in that neighborhood? Reuben's apartment. He's headed right toward it, on foot. Police car stops him. He's got different clothes on than the description, but same build. So a policeman just wants to talk to him. So he motions to him, come over here. He stops the car. Policeman gets out of the car to talk to Lee Harvey Oswald, just to check him out. Lee Harvey Oswald pulls a gun, shoots the policeman right on the spot. Policeman drops dead. There's a parking lot attendant right there who sees it. Lee Harvey Oswald runs into a theater. Parking lot attendant calls the police. 2 policemen go into the theater. There are very few people there. It's in the middle of the afternoon. And the manager points out this fellow that's there. The officers go to approach him. Before they can get their hands on him, why, he jumps up and puts the gun right in the chest of the police officer and pulls the trigger, and it misfired. Or he would have killed him. They're able to grab him, and they take him into custody. And the whole country's watching the next morning as they're trying to transfer him out of the jail over to safer custody. And the whole United States watched Ruby go up and kill him. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was a psychopathic type of person, a psychotic type of person. Or psychopathic rather is a better description. A very erratic type of person. He's got all these marbles, but they rattle. And the people that were behind this knew that if 3 good FBI agents got that egotistical individual under interrogation, it wouldn't be difficult to break him. He'd get to bragging. He's the kind of a person that pretty soon wants to brag about what he's accomplished. Doesn't take very long, really. And so they killed him. And Ruby killed him. Now, next thing we know, the one witness against Lee Harvey Oswald that saw him murder the police officers, that attendant, that parking lot attendant. That parking lot attendant was murdered. And the police were able to find the man that killed him. They tried him and convicted him. The evidence was all against him. At the very last minute, a girl came up and she said, it must have been mistaken identity. Because I'm embarrassed to say this, but he was with me all night. And he got off. The police then started investigating her, and got some of her background, arrested her, put her in a cell, and the next morning she's hanged herself. She's dead. You know who that girl was? That was Ruby's striptease dancer. That's who that girl was. Any of you ever heard this before? It appeared in the Dallas papers, and I specifically made an effort to see what the wire service would do with those cases. They just absolutely pushed that down out of existence. It appeared in the Texas papers. You couldn't keep it out of them. But it appeared nowhere else. And people tried to sit back and say, of course, you know, this wasn't a conspiracy of any kind. This was et cetera, et cetera. And here Lee Harvey Oswald had $5,000, most of it still in his possession, which came from Castro. And he had a visa to go to Mexico City and another visa to go over to Cuba, and then he was going to be shipped over across the seas. Well, what I'm trying to say is that when President McKay said we should know what's going on so that we'd know what to do about it, he was just trying to get us to do a little homework. We didn't do it, and we're not going to do it. But I just wanted you to know that when you study our history the way this history is, they are the same pattern. And all the prophets talk about it. So when you're through the Book of Mormon, you ought to know more about American history than a lot of people with American history PhDs, because you know what to look for. And I said, I know some very fine men, good men, say, Brother Skousen, where'd you ever get this hang-up on a conspiracy? I said, I don't have a hang-up on a conspiracy. I just believe what the Scriptures say. I knew that if I looked for it, it would be there. And believe me, it's there. Oh, this has been going on for centuries, right? But it's not that simple. You're being oversimplistic. And then my answer is, I wish it weren't that simple. I wish it weren't true. But all the congressional committees said it was true. All the FBI investigation said it was true. And why historians insist that it isn't true, I just don't understand. Because they're not bad men, but they just won't accept it. So our problem in educating the people is credibility. We have a very difficult time sharing this information, like what I've just told you. Now, you see, the people that were really on the inside, when they wanted to really destroy President Johnson, they just revealed how ridiculous the Warren Commission report was and ripped him to pieces. They had people appear on television for an hour at a time. None of us could get on television. But their people, when they were ready to destroy President Johnson and get in another candidate, they went after him. They'd used him. They were now ready to get rid of him, and they really did. He couldn't even run for a second term as president. Now, the history of today is as exciting as anything you're reading in the Book of Mormon, if you just kind of take the time to find out what's going on. All right, now, this Gadiant movement was apparently by a very prominent politician who wants to use assassination to get what he's after, just as they do today. They'll use assassination and do regularly. And he sets it up so that he can get Helaman II killed. And who's going to do it? Cumin. And then they're going to appoint, he's going to run for office, he'll get elected, and then they will appoint all these various people to their respective positions. I wish we knew the name of this servant of Helaman. I've run across people that are like this. They just love the man they work for so much, they just kind of keep their eyes open. And they see a situation, looks kind of suspicious, they just make it their business to kind of be there. I worked with an FBI agent down in Los Angeles that was like that. He amazed me. He used to be a Los Angeles police officer, had a college degree, entered the FBI. He had the sharpest sleuthing sense of probably anybody I ever worked with in law enforcement. And he just sensed when something was wrong. And everybody get all excited about some big gangster meeting and so forth. And he'd say, well, I'll tell you who was there. And here's what they discussed. And here's what they're going to do. He was just like this fellow. And one night I said to him, Al, now what made you find out about that? Well, he said, I was going over to the there, and I thought they must be over there for something besides a cocktail party. And so he said, it was a buddy of mine, and And after it was all over, he told me what it was about. I just stayed around. I said, well, how long were you there? Well, he said, I stayed all night and in the lobby, and the next morning when they came down, I just talked to him. And the FBI got information, marvelous information. We got way ahead of everybody in the investigation just because we had one agent with a sleuthing sense. He just knew something was wrong. Got to find out about that. That's the servant of Helaman. Something's wrong. We got to kind of check on this. And next thing he knows the secret signs, you know. Whatever. And he knows all the passwords. So when Kishkumen shows up at the main headquarters building, well, he goes up to him and gives him the you-know-what too. And Kishkumen, aha, my brother. And so they're old buddies. Kishkumen really puts his arm around him. I mean, we're blood brothers. I mean, we murder together. That's the kind of spirit. So he said, I'm so glad I ran across you because I got to get in the chamber there and I got to kill Helaman and I got to get out again. I'll help you. I will take you in. Thank you, old brother, old buddy. So they go in there. Now that servant had a very serious decision to make. Shall he let him get in there where he actually maybe could break away and stab Helaman? Or had he better stop him before he ever gets in anywhere near the chief judge? And he had a decision to make. Now, this is a terrible decision to have to make because you're not accustomed to killing people. You're going to take a human life. Had this man already said that he was going to kill Helaman? Now, in the law, we call this a prosecutive conspiracy. People cannot be prosecuted for sitting around and talking about how they're going to kill Helaman II. You could have the police right there listening in. You couldn't arrest one of them. But the moment they go out to get the bow and arrow or the dagger or buy the gun, that's called an overt act. It's now a prosecutive conspiracy. In other words, now you can arrest them for a conspiracy to commit murder or a conspiracy to burn down a building or a conspiracy to rob a bank. Just the moment they commit an overt act to carry out what they formerly just had in their brains, you can prosecute. Everybody follow that? See the reason for the law? That's a good law. We shouldn't prosecute people for just thinking about something. Because everybody thinks about some bad things sometimes. But it's when they undertake to do something about it, then you can arrest them. And the charge is conspiracy, meaning combining together to commit a crime. But you can't prosecute until they try to carry it out. All right, so the servant had a decision to make. He's got a murder on his hands, so he kills him on the spot. That must have been a great surprise to Kishkumen to wake up and find he was dead. And he's in the spirit world. I wonder if Pahoran II was there to greet him. In any event, it's like this man that shot Don Clark, the policeman in Salt Lake. He raised his gun, shot the policeman in the head, and he himself went to the spirit world first. He was dead first. So that must have been interesting when Officer Don Clark crossed over. I hear this fellow was already. He was dead too. So then he went and told Helaman. Now they went and searched for more members of the gang. They did find one or two. They didn't find Kishkumen, but they were able to find occasionally now and again. And whenever they did, of course, they executed him. Now Gadian became very suspicious. Typical criminal mind. If things don't go right on, they're just as nervous as cats, and they're gone. They don't take a chance. Somebody might say, "Well, let's stick around. Maybe he's just been delayed." No, not Gadian. Not a criminal mind. They go. They don't ever take a chance. In their hearts, they're cowards. And they run just the second that something doesn't look like it's exactly right. So he took off. Now, it's about this time that we get, after a little period of peace and a little bit of settling down, it becomes unsettled again and people become very uncomfortable, even living in the land southward. So they go from the land northward. Now I want to show you something peculiar. This is all out of proportion, of course. I've just written here's a land northward and a land southward with an isthmus between them. Looks a little bit like North and South America. One place that we've located is in North America. That's the Great Lakes region with the hill Cumorah right by it. And that we've located. We also know that Moroni was out in this territory of Utah and actually dedicated temple sites which they were never able to build. Oh, that's the writings of Brother Snow, Brigham Young, the man who, in fact, was told to Brigham Young when he went to St. George. They picked out about 5 sites. St. George, you know, where the big D is up on the mountain. They had a place up that direction. They went up on the butte. They went over by President Ivans' home. And so Brother Brigham Young got up in the morning and he said, well, Brother Snow, I don't know where the rest of the saints are going to meet, but I'm going to be down in the valley dedicating the site that Moroni dedicated. It's right in the middle of the swamp. And President Young said, we're going to honor the site dedicated by Moroni, and it was right here in the bottom of this beautiful valley, which is now swampland. But if we have to move that whole mountain of lava rock to fill this hole so we can build a temple, we're going to do it. We're going to build it on the spot Moroni dedicated. Apparently he'd just been told the night before. It was apparently new to him. And that's what they ended up doing. They practically put a whole mountain of lava rock in there, and they took what they called the old sow, which was a cannon from the Mexican War, and filled it full of rocks. It's a great big fat cannon, filled it full of rocks, and they used that as a tamper. And they tamped hundreds and hundreds of tons of rock down into that swamp to build the foundation for that temple. Now, when he went up in Manti, he dedicated a spot right against the mountain. And there were a lot of rocks, a lot of caves and little holes back in there just loaded with rattlesnakes. Rattlesnake den. And the saints, as soon as Brigham Young knew where he dedicated, they cleaned it out. And the temple is built, much of the temple is built from the stone that's brought right out of the mountain itself. And if you want to read that sometimes, it's in Temples of the Most High by Lundwall. Any other question? Now, as these people went up north, Mormon takes time out. He starts projecting down through the years. He said, you know, they eventually covered the whole territory. And he said there were great sections up here which were desolate, not because the land was infertile or unfertile, but because what? Because of the desolation of many cities and the fact that timber had all been taken off by the earlier people, the Jaredites. So he said, because there was very little timber, they really would have preferred to build with timber, but since they couldn't until they started shipping some up from the south, they began building houses out of what? Concrete. No? Out of cement. Now, isn't that interesting? When you first heard the Book of Mormon say that houses were built out of cement, what did you think of, concrete or rock? So did I. I didn't know that cement meant cementing rocks together. I was thinking of concrete houses. But no, these were rock houses, and the rocks were cemented together. Now you can do this very fast. And the word cement comes from a Latin term that I mentioned in your text, which means putting together the rocks, making them fast. And so that's what they did. They built rock houses. Now they don't last very well. The Indians today built some rock houses. All down in South America, you have lots of rock houses, but they're never good for more than 300 or 400 years usually at the most. So that's almost like a HUD house, isn't it? It just goes fast. Well, that's what it's talking about. So you'll know the next time somebody says they built houses of cement, and you hear a cynic or a skeptic say, we've never found a single cement house yet. You'll know that he doesn't know what cement means, because there are millions of cement houses all over Latin America, but most of them of recent date. And I'll just say this in closing. When we get down to Machu Picchu or Cusco and so forth, we find the rock work that is so beautiful down in the lower levels, and then it's a little coarser, and then on the top it's cement. It's just rocks piled together and cemented, plastered in. But the beautiful rock work where they had magnificent, highly tempered tools, that's down at the bottom. You can't even put a sheet of paper in between the joints. No cement at all. And they made them deliberately irregular just to show what good artists they were. How they can make it fit. Then others, they made perfect oblong, perfect squares. They do that too. Okay, any questions now? All right, I'll try and catch up with you next time.